Maria Vasquez grew up in a small apartment in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago, where the walls were thin and the winters were long. She was the middle child of 5, born to parents who had immigrated from Mexico years before she arrived, carrying nothing but determination and a willingness to work harder than anyone around them. Her father, Eduardo, spent his days loading freight at a warehouse near the rail yards. Her mother, Lucinda, cleaned office buildings in the evenings after spending her afternoons watching the younger children. There was love in that apartment, but there was very little room for anything extra, and nobody in the family had ever thought much about music. Maria was a quiet child. Not shy in a way that worried people, but quiet in the way that some children are when they spend a lot of time watching the world instead of demanding attention from it. Her teachers at school wrote things like pleasant and cooperative on her early report cards. She followed instructions. She turned in her work on time. She never caused problems. In a classroom full of louder personalities, she was the kind of student that a tired teacher could look past without meaning any harm. Nobody was unkind to her. She simply went unnoticed, which in some ways is its own kind of loneliness. When Maria was 8 years old, her elementary school received a small grant that allowed them to bring a music program into the building for the first time in several years. A music teacher named Mr. Danforth was hired on a part-time basis. He was a quiet man himself, somewhere in his 50s, with patient eyes and a habit of arriving early to set up his classroom before anyone else reached the building. He brought with him a donated upright piano that had been repaired just enough to stay in tune, and he set it against the wall beneath a window that looked out onto the school's concrete courtyard. Every student in the 3rd grade rotated through his class once a week. Most of them treated it like a break from real schoolwork, a chance to bang on instruments and be silly for 40 minutes. Mr. Danforth did not mind this. He understood that children needed to feel free before they could feel curious. But during the 3rd week of the program, when he was walking around the room letting students take turns at the piano, something happened that made him stop moving entirely. Maria had sat down on the bench without much expression on her face. She had watched the other students press keys randomly, laughing at the sounds they made. When it was her turn, she sat still for a moment, placed both hands on the keys, and began to play a simple melody that she had only heard once, a tune Mr. Danforth had demonstrated at the start of class. She did not play it perfectly, but the way she found the notes was not random and it was not accidental. She was listening to something inside her head and reaching for it with her fingers, and the connection between what she heard and what she played was immediate in a way that Mr. Danforth had only seen in students who had been studying for years. He did not say anything dramatic in that moment. He simply stood beside the piano and watched her finish. When she lifted her hands from the keys, she looked up at him with an expression that seemed to ask whether she had done something wrong. He told her she had done well and moved on with the class, but he did not forget what he had seen. Over the following weeks, Mr. Danforth began paying closer attention to Maria during their sessions. He gave her slightly more challenging exercises than the rest of the group, small things that the other students would not notice, just to see how she responded. Every time she responded better than he expected. She had no formal training, no piano at home, no music lessons outside of school. But she absorbed everything he showed her the way dry ground absorbs water. She retained it, built on it, and applied it the next time she sat down as if she had spent the days in between quietly reviewing it, though there was no instrument for her to practice on. By the time spring arrived, Mr. Danforth had made a decision. He stayed after school one Thursday and called Lucinda Vasquez. His Spanish was not strong and her English came with effort, but they understood each other well enough. He told her that Maria had something he did not see often in students her age. He was careful with his words because he did not want to create pressure where there had been none before. He simply said that if the family was ever open to it, he believed Maria would benefit from more time with the piano, and that he was willing to give her extra time before school on the mornings he was in the building. Lucinda was quiet on the other end of the line for a moment. Then she asked him to repeat what he had said, not because she had not understood, but because she wanted to hear it again. A teacher was calling to say that her daughter had something worth developing. In a life that had not offered many of those phone calls, she wanted to let the words settle before she responded. She said yes. She thanked him. And when she hung up the phone, she stood in her kitchen for a long moment before she called Maria in from the other room and told her that her teacher thought she was special. The early morning sessions with Mr. Danforth began the following September when Maria entered 4th grade. She arrived at school 40 minutes before the first bell 3 days a week, walking the 6 blocks from her apartment in the dark of early morning with her mother beside her. Both of them quiet in the cold air, their breath visible in small clouds ahead of them. Lucinda would walk her to the door, watch her go inside, and then head to the bus stop to begin her own long day. It was a sacrifice built into a routine, and neither of them spoke about it as a sacrifice because that was simply how things worked in their family. Mr. Danforth started her on proper technique from the beginning. He taught her how to sit, how to hold her hands, how to let her fingers fall on the keys with weight rather than force. Maria absorbed every instruction without resistance. She never argued with corrections, and she never grew frustrated when something did not come immediately, which was rare because most things came to her quickly. What struck Mr. Danforth most was not just her technical ability but her memory. She could hear a piece once, study it for a session or two, and then reproduce it with an accuracy that went beyond imitation. She was hearing the music structurally, understanding how it was built, not just copying sounds. By the middle of that school year, she was playing pieces that students twice her age would find challenging. Mr. Danforth had begun bringing in sheet music from his own collection at home, things he had not touched in years, pulling them out in the evenings and thinking about what she might be ready for next. He was not a man who exaggerated, and he had spent decades in music education, so he was careful about the conclusions he allowed himself to draw. But privately, in the honest part of his thinking, he believed he was watching something that came along very rarely. The moment that changed everything happened in the spring of that year, during a school assembly that had been organized to celebrate the end of the music program's first full academic year. Parents were invited. A small number of students were selected to perform short pieces in the gymnasium, which had been set up with folding chairs and a microphone near the old upright piano that had been wheeled in from Mr. Danforth's classroom. The performances were meant to be simple and cheerful, a demonstration that the program had been worthwhile, something the school could show to the people who had funded the grant. Maria was not originally scheduled to perform. Mr. Danforth had listed 3 other students whose progress was visible and whose confidence in front of others seemed steady. But 2 days before the assembly, one of those students became sick, and Mr. Danforth asked Maria if she would be willing to take the empty spot. She nodded and asked him what she should play. He told her she could choose something they had worked on together. She thought about it for less than a minute and told him she had an idea for something a little different. He asked her what she meant. She told him she had been working on something at school during lunch in the room when it was empty, and she wanted to play that instead. He did not know she had been coming to the room on her own. He asked her to show him what she had been doing. What she played for him that afternoon was not a piece from his collection. It was not something he had taught her. It was something she had composed herself quietly, over weeks of stolen lunch periods, building it note by note in her mind, and testing it on the keys when the room was available. It was not a simple melody. It had movement and structure and emotional shape. It shifted in the middle in a way that felt intentional and mature, and it resolved at the end in a manner that left a feeling behind after the sound stopped. Mr. Danforth sat in a chair across the room and listened without speaking until she finished. He asked her how long she had been working on it. She said since winter. He asked if anyone had helped her. She shook her head. He looked at the floor for a moment and then looked back at her and told her that was what she should play at the assembly. The gymnasium that Friday afternoon was filled with the ordinary noise of folding chairs and restless children and parents who had left work early and were grateful for the distraction. Eduardo Vasquez sat in the 3rd row in his work clothes because he had not had time to go home and change. Lucinda sat beside him with the 2 youngest children on her lap. They had been told Maria was performing, but they had not been told what to expect because Maria herself had not said much about it. When she sat down at the piano, the room was still noisy. A few people were still finding seats. She waited without visible discomfort until the room settled on its own, and then she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The noise stopped within the first 10 seconds. Not because anyone signaled for quiet, but because the room responded to what it was hearing the way people respond to something that does not match what they were prepared for. Parents who had been checking their phones put them away. Children who had been squirming in their chairs became still. Eduardo Vasquez gripped the seat of his folding chair with both hands without realizing he was doing it. Lucinda stopped bouncing the child on her knee. Maria played her composition from beginning to end without a single mistake and without looking at anyone in the room. When she finished, there was a pause of about 3 seconds before the applause began, and that pause said more than the applause did. People were collecting themselves. They were returning from wherever the music had taken them. Eduardo did not clap at first because he was crying, and he was using both hands to manage that quietly, which was not something anyone who knew him had ever seen him do in public. The program coordinator who had overseen the grant was sitting in the back row. Before the assembly ended, she had already taken out her phone and sent 2 messages to people she trusted in the music world in Chicago. The messages sent from the back row of that gymnasium moved faster than anyone in Maria's family could have anticipated. Within 2 weeks of the assembly, Mr. Danforth received a call from a woman named Patricia Howe, who ran youth programming at the Chicago Symphony Orchestra's Education Foundation. She had heard about Maria through the program coordinator and wanted to know if an informal audition could be arranged. Mr. Danforth called Lucinda that same evening. There were more pauses on the phone this time, longer ones, and a few questions about what an audition like this would mean and whether it would cost the family anything. Mr. Danforth told her it would cost them nothing and that he would be there with Maria the entire time. The audition took place on a Saturday morning in a rehearsal room at Orchestra Hall on Michigan Avenue. Maria had never been in a building like it. She walked through the lobby without touching anything, looking up at the ceilings and then back down at her shoes, which Lucinda had polished the night before. Patricia Howe was warm and spoke to Maria directly rather than around her, which Maria noticed and appreciated. There was a Steinway grand piano in the rehearsal room that was larger than anything Maria had ever sat at, and when she first touched the keys she pressed a single note and listened to the way it filled the room, her expression shifting slightly as she registered the difference in the instrument. She played her own composition first. Then she played two pieces Mr. Danforth had prepared with her. Then Patricia asked if she would be comfortable sight-reading something, which meant playing a piece of sheet music she had never seen before. Maria said yes. The sheet music Patricia placed in front of her was not a beginner piece. It was something a conservatory student would be assigned. Maria studied it for about 90 seconds, moving her eyes across the page with the focused stillness of someone reading something important. Then she played it, not perfectly, but with a musical intelligence that made the imperfections beside the point. Patricia Howe offered Maria a full scholarship to the Orchestra Foundation's Youth Conservatory program before the family left the building that day. The program included weekly private lessons with senior faculty, access to instruments, participation in ensemble training, and eventually opportunities to perform. For a family that had never had access to any of this, the offer sat in the room for a moment before Eduardo, who had come with them that day and was standing near the door in his good jacket, said yes on behalf of all of them in a voice that was steady and quiet and final. The conservatory changed the pace of Maria's development in ways that even Mr. Danforth had not fully predicted. She was placed with a teacher named Professor Anneliese Bauer, a German-trained pianist in her 60s who had performed across Europe and had spent the last 2 decades teaching because she believed teaching was where the real work happened. Professor Bauer was not a gentle teacher in the soft sense of the word. She was precise and demanding and did not offer praise as a cushion. She expected her students to take the music seriously because she took it seriously, and students who did not rise to that expectation did not last long in her studio. Maria lasted. More than that, she thrived under the pressure in a way that surprised even Professor Bauer, who had taught talented students for decades, and believed she had a reliable sense of where a student's ceiling was. With Maria, every time she thought she was approaching the ceiling, it moved. The girl did not just learn what she was taught. She digested it and returned with questions that pushed the lesson further, and her compositions, which she continued to write on her own time, showed a developing voice that was not imitative of anything Professor Bauer had introduced her to. By the time Maria was 12, she had performed in 3 youth showcases organized by the foundation. Local press had written short pieces about her. A columnist for a Chicago arts publication used the phrase "unassuming brilliance" in a review of one of her performances, and that phrase spread in the small world of music education circles in the city. When she was 13, she was selected to perform a solo piece at a fundraising gala for the foundation attended by several hundred people, many of them influential figures in Chicago's arts and business communities. She played a composition she had written herself, 12 minutes long, fully realized, the kind of piece that did not sound like the work of a 13-year-old by any reasonable measure. A music producer named Gerald Fitch, who had spent 30 years working with classical artists, attended that gala as a guest. He was in Chicago for unrelated business and had come to the event as a favor to a friend on the foundation's board. He had no particular expectations for the evening. He sat near the front because he had arrived early, and when Maria came out and sat at the piano, he observed her the way experienced people in his field observe young performers, with a kind of patient skepticism that only lifts when something real appears. Something real appeared. He introduced himself to Patricia Howe after the performance and asked detailed questions. He flew back to New York the next morning and made 3 phone calls before noon. Within 6 months, Maria Vasquez had been invited to audition for one of the most respected young artist programs in the country, based at a conservatory in New York, and the invitation had come with the offer of a scholarship that would cover everything. Eduardo and Lucinda sat at the kitchen table in the Pilsen apartment for a long time after they read the letter. It was a kitchen table where they had sat through many difficult conversations over the years, conversations about money, and about managing things that were hard to manage. This was a different kind of conversation, and it took them a while to find the right words for it because they had not prepared for this particular kind of difficulty, the difficulty of something being bigger than you expected your life to become. Maria accepted the invitation to the New York Conservatory program at the age of 14. She moved into a student residence with a small bag of belongings and a keyboard her parents had bought her second-hand the year before, which she kept beside her bed because she was used to the weight of it being nearby even when she could not play. She called her mother every evening for the first month. The calls were not always long, but they were consistent, and Lucinda kept a small notebook near the phone where she wrote down things Maria told her about her days, not for any particular reason other than that she wanted to hold on to what was happening. The conservatory was a different world from Pilsen in every visible way. Maria's classmates had grown up with private lessons from early childhood, with instruments in their homes, with parents who could afford summer music programs and international competitions, and coaches who specialized in single aspects of technique. Some of them had been performing publicly since they were 5 years old. The culture of the institution assumed a particular kind of background, and Maria arrived without that background, which meant she arrived carrying something invisible that nobody in the building could easily account for. She was not the most technically polished student in her cohort when she arrived. She knew this and did not pretend otherwise. What she was, and what became clear over the months that followed, was the most musically honest. Her playing had a quality that technical perfection alone cannot produce. A quality that comes from someone who learned to listen before they learned the rules, who developed feeling for music before they developed the vocabulary to describe it. Her teachers noticed it. Her fellow students noticed it in the way that young people notice things they cannot yet name but can feel sitting beside them in a room. She won her first major national competition at 16, performing a piece she had composed herself. The jury's comments, which were published in the program notes afterward, used words like maturity and authenticity, an unmistakable individual voice. And those words meant something specific coming from people who listened to competitive classical performances regularly and were not easily moved. The win brought press coverage beyond the music world for the first time, short articles in general publications, a brief segment on a local television station in Chicago that Eduardo watched sitting forward in his chair with his hands clasped, and a profile piece in a national arts magazine that told the story of the girl from Pilsen and the donated upright piano and the teacher who had made a phone call. Mr. Danforth read that profile at his kitchen table on a Sunday morning. He had retired from teaching by then, his part-time position having ended when the grant funding ran out years earlier. He was mentioned in the piece briefly, described as the teacher who first recognized her ability. He read that section twice and then set the magazine down and looked out his window for a while. He was not a man who needed recognition, but he was glad the story had been told, not for his part in it, but because the story itself deserved to be told. What Maria represented was not simply a talent discovered by chance. She represented something that institutions and systems and people in positions of cultural authority tend to overlook, not out of malice but out of habit. The habit of looking in familiar places for familiar things, of expecting greatness to arrive in expected packaging. Maria had not arrived in expected packaging. She had arrived in a thin-walled apartment in Pilsen with parents who worked long hours and no piano at home, and no framework that the music world had prepared to receive her. And because she had arrived that way, she had nearly not arrived at all. The program coordinator who sent those 2 messages from the back of the gymnasium, Mr. Danforth who made the phone call to Lucinda, Patricia Howe who offered a scholarship the same day she heard Maria play, all of them had made choices to look and to act, and those choices had made a path where there was not one before. But Maria had also made choices. She had chosen to keep walking to that school room during lunch. She had chosen to build something in private without anyone asking her to. She had chosen to sit down at the piano at the assembly and play what was true rather than what was safe. When she was 19, Maria gave a full solo recital at a venue in New York that seated 800 people. Eduardo and Lucinda flew in for the first time in their lives, a trip that had been quietly organized and paid for by the Conservatory Foundation without being announced as a gift. They sat in the 4th row. Lucinda wore a dress she had bought specifically for the evening. Eduardo sat straight in his seat for the entire performance, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes on his daughter. Maria walked onto the stage in a simple dark dress and sat at the Steinway without theatrics. She looked at the keys for a moment in the particular way she always had before she began, the look of someone checking in with something internal, making sure the connection was there. Then she played for 90 minutes without an intermission, moving through her own compositions and through pieces by composers she had studied deeply, and the audience sat with her for all of it. When she finished and stood to take her bow, the applause was immediate and full, the kind that fills a room from the floor up. She looked out at the audience without a performance smile, just an honest expression of someone who had done the thing they were made to do and knew it. She found her parents in the fourth row and held her eyes there for a moment before she bowed again. Eduardo Vasquez put his hands together and clapped steadily, his eyes clear, his posture the same as it had been when he sat loading freight in the dark of early morning, a man built from work and love and the willingness to keep going. Lucinda pressed her hands against her mouth and then lowered them and joined him. The notebook was at home on the kitchen counter in Pilsen, and later that week she would write in it one more time, a single line about the evening, something she wanted to hold on to. Maria had not taught anyone anything through speeches or declarations. She had taught them by existing fully in the thing she was, by refusing without ever announcing the refusal to be less than what she carried inside. She taught them that genius does not check its address before it arrives. She taught them that quiet is not the same as empty. And she taught them, most of all, that what we fail to look for, we will fail to find, and that the cost of that failure is paid by people who deserved better than our inattention. People who deserved better than our inattention. Like, share, and subscribe, don't miss it.